So in the previous lesson, we were talking about the president, his responsibilities. In today's lesson, we'll talk about the president's team and the support staff that he has. So every day, the president has to deal with a ton of problems, more problems than any one single person could deal with. And the president is the boss of tons of people. Remember, the White House has more than 130 rooms, tons of different offices, tons of different agencies. He's in charge of 50 different states. So that is a lot for one person to handle. So how can he do it? The president has to have a good team of supporters to help him achieve the goals. So the president has lots of people who can give him advice, but the main parts of his team are going to be the vice president, and our current vice president is Mike Pence, and Joe Biden is vice president, and he's running to become president. So you got lots of vice presidents in the news lately. You have the White House office, you have special counsels, and then you have the president's cabinet. So the vice president, in some ways, is the closest person to the president. They're elected together as a team. Now, that wasn't the way it always has been, but after the first couple elections, they changed it so the president and the vice president run as a pair. So right now we have Joe Biden running with Kamala Harris as his vice president, and we have Donald Trump running with Mike Pence as his vice president. So they're elected together, and one of his most important responsibilities is to be able to take over if the president is not able to do his job. So the president has a huge responsibility that he might never actually have to fulfill. Joe Biden was president for 8 years while Obama was president, and he never had to take over and become the president during that time. So that is the vice president's probably most important responsibility. If you remember, you compare the power of the vice president to the president. The vice president typically has much less power. In the Senate, he can only vote when it's a tie. And he doesn't go and give speeches as often. He doesn't have the same authority the president has. But he does have that one big responsibility to fill in if the president cannot complete his job, if he's removed from office, if he dies in office, or he's impeached. So the book's actually got a little bit of wrong data here. It says since 1900, 5 vice presidents have succeeded to office. It's actually closer to 9. Many of those people were filling in for presidents that died or were assassinated. There was one exception. Richard Nixon was the only president to ever resign. They were in the process of impeaching him and removing him from office when Gerald Ford, his vice president, stepped up and became the president. The president also decides how much work the vice president is going to do. Sometimes the president will give the vice president lots of responsibilities. Other times, they'll just count on the vice president to be there for support and backup and fill in, as needed. So the president has lots of people who work with him, and he's got a group called the Executive Office, and they are going to be the president's closest advisors. They usually work in the White House or very close to the White House. So the White House office is basically like the nerve center or, central command for the president's operations. There's a guy there called the Chief of Staff. And the easiest way to think about what they do is like they would be the manager of a store. They're not the one who owns, think about McDonald's manager. They don't own the store, but they're in charge of the day-to-day operations. And the Chief of Staff is in charge of keeping things running smoothly at the White House. There's also a person called the Press Secretary. They might have one of the most difficult jobs. And I'll show you the president's current press secretary in a second. Her name is Kayleigh McEnany. And her job is to go and talk with the news anytime they have questions that the president can't be there to answer. And usually they try to put a positive spin on whatever the president is doing. They also have people who write the president's speeches. Now, I don't know if you guys knew this, but the president doesn't usually write everything that he's going to say. Sometimes they'll wing it a little bit, but they're usually going to go in and have someone who helps them write their speech. They tell them what they want to say, and they'll kind of word it the best way possible. Okay. So the president also has some help in these groups called special councils, and we'll go over a couple of them. One of the most important ones is the National Security Council, and they help make plans to keep the country safe and deal with security concerns. It usually only has a few members: the Vice President, the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, the CIA. There's other councils too, like the Office of Management and Budget, and they help the president come up with an economic plan. If you remember in the previous lesson, we talked about how the president has to come up with a budget for over $1 trillion, and they're going to help the president figure out what the best way to spend that money is going to be. So now we'll talk about the president's cabinet. And the cabinet are a group of people that are actually really close to the president. Maybe not as close as the vice president, but they're pretty close. Some of the president's closest advisors are called cabinet members. And today I believe there's 15 cabinets, 15 executive departments. So these people are usually experts in their fields, and if they're chosen for this job to help the president, be Secretary of Defense or Secretary of Education, they usually have a lot of experience in the field they're chosen for. So if you are in charge of one of these departments, one of these cabinet positions, you're called a secretary. You're not answering phones and, doing paperwork like that. You are in charge of a major department in the United States. The exception to that is the Justice Department. The person in charge of that is called the Attorney General. So the president can pick whoever he wants to fill these positions, but the Senate has to approve them. And like I said earlier, they're usually an expert in their field. Like the Secretary of Defense is going to have military experience. The Secretary of Treasury is probably going to have worked at a bank or some kind of financial institution. The Secretary of Agriculture probably knows a lot about farming and growing food. The president's going to meet with them usually on like a weekly basis, maybe more, maybe less, depending on what's going on. And they give the president advice and try to get the president to pay a little bit more attention to their concerns. So, for the president to be successful, he has to be in touch with the people and know what the people of the country want. Now, there's many different ways the president can find out what the people want. He can listen to what his cabinet or what his cabinet members are concerned about, what they're talking to him about. He can talk to the governors and the representatives and senators to see what their people's concerns are. So all of this is really important. And if the president wants to be successful, he's going to have to be popular and get reelected. So the president can read the news, you can watch the news. I know Donald Trump currently spends a lot of time watching Fox News, and that's how he gets his news about what the people in America want. Being president would be incredibly difficult because you got to figure out what everybody in the country wants and try to do something that's going to make the most people happy. But no matter what decision you make, you're never going to be able to make the entire country happy with one decision. Okay, guys. So let's take a look at Chapter 7, Lesson 2 worksheet. Get that done, and we'll go over it in a little bit.